where does God actually speak in the scriptures about his anger over the nations trying to divide the land? And I know the context is the end times, or leading up to the end times. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it might be good for me to read it because we see this in Joel chapter 3 is one of the best examples. And even in ancient times when God, I could go back into, and we could and even Deuteronomy 9, where um, you have God saying through Moses. Moses is on Mount Nebo. Deuteronomy is means second law. He's reiterating the law in Deuteronomy chapter 5 as they're about ready to go into the land. And in that, he says, and we see in the Pentateuch, God says, look, this land is mine. Okay. I mean, I'm letting you use it. I'm giving it to you, but I'm letting you use it. But ultimately, the land, if we say whose land is, it's God's land. This is very, very special piece of real estate that God has chosen to put his name. And in Deuteronomy 9, uh, God says to them, don't think for 1 second that as you're going into this land that I'm going to give you, that you did it because it's because of your righteousness. Like 5, 6 times he says it's not because of your uprightness of heart. It's not because of your righteousness. And so I always ask the question today, does Israel belong in the land? And I would say yes, irrevocable promises. Do they deserve to be in the land? No, of course not. They never did. Okay, so even before they ever got there, and so the disobedience of Israel, I mean, in that passage is where God calls them, for you are a stiff-necked people. And, God is the one labeling them. He's not anti-Semitic. He's just stating a fact of what had happened. And so when we come today and we see this is God's land, it's always been God's land, and those promises have not been revoked, as we know, Romans 11. But then what you see, and this is why God has been very adamant at protecting the land, because there's several things that come to play. When you come, for example, in Ezekiel 38, 37, 38, 39, or even into 36, God talks about his glory and how the nation, the fact, he uses the language that Israel profaned his name. But the profaning of God's name was the fact, the result of God's name being profaned was the fact that they were outside of the land. And it's fascinating because the very fact that they were outside of the land at different times is a demonstration of, and it's a question about God's faithfulness. Like, oh well, if God was so faithful, then why are you outside of the land? And then of course God has to the prophets have to remind him that it's not because of God's unfaithfulness; it's because of the people's unfaithfulness. And so what that means is God is very, very protective of this land. As we know, historically speaking. When they were exiled in 70 AD and then ultimately in 135 AD with the Bar Kokhba revolt, there's always been Jews in the land. That's just historically accurate. There hasn't been a lot. They've tried through the centuries. People can look at the history. I document this in my new book, The Red Heifer, The Mystery of the Red Heifer, how they attempted to build temples over the years, and sometimes they got close, and sometimes they had help, but it never materialized. So all that to say, at the end of the day, God will not give this land up. He's given it to them. And so when we come to Joel 3, it says this, for behold, in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my heritage Israel, because they, the nations, have scattered them among the nations and have divided up my land and have cast lots for my people and have traded a boy and all the other things. So this is one of the main passages that speak about don't you dare divide my land. I mean, this is God's land. And so anybody that anybody that would seek to divide God's land through agreement or whatever is going to be fighting against God himself. Now, if God wants to say, and as he did, as we know in Old Testament times, say through a prophet, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, others, hey, I'm going to remove you because of your disobedience, and I'm going to use either Assyria or Nebuchadnezzar or even the Romans in the first century. That's God's prerogative. But if we look at history, no nation it was under the Ottoman Empire for at least the last, from basically 1417 to 1917. But for the most part, nobody went in there and took up residence and made a huge, lasting empire of civilization. In fact, we know in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that God says that he's going to bring Israel back in the latter days, and they are going to come back and be onto the mountains of Israel. And in fact, they will come back to a land that had long been desolate. And so if you look at the last 1800 years, we know that it was a dump, and the climate was horrible. There was no green. Um, we know Mark Twain came in the late 1800s and was
Yeah,
like,
I
"This
have the
is
book right on my shelf right here,
yeah,
Innocence Abroad.
yeah, innocents abroad." And
Yeah.
he's like, "Man, who would want to live here? This is horrible." So his testimony is evidence of God's comment that this land has long been desolate. And so then, as we know, Israel came back, and as they invested in the land, and they planted trees and other things, and they made it green, and it's blossoming, and it's one of the largest exporters of fruit and everything else. That is not how anybody ever found it in the Middle Ages. So that's important too, in just creating an understanding for people to know, again, who owns the land, who was there, and we'll talk about it, the Palestinians and other things. um, and so anyways, so yes, Joel 3 is one of the main passages that, as we're watching this unfold, whether it's even Israeli leaders giving up Gaza, other things like, whoa, whoa,
Mhm.
whoa, God's upset with that.
Yeah, there's a book by John McTiernan, As America Has Done to Israel. I have that also on my shelf here. And it documents all of the incredible disasters that took place almost right away, sometimes on the exact day that some of our past presidents tried to either stop Jewish settlements or divide the land or land for peace or it's just pretty incredible when you actually look at it that that actually is documented in recent times. And going back to what you just said, you were quoting from Joel. So talk a little bit about the context there. We're sure that that's a future context, correct?
I think so, because it's talking about the restoration of Israel, which we know is is a process. Um, when they came back in 48, this is often the challenge with people, is people, all of us, myself included, is we can read the Bible and read it. For example, we can read Genesis 3, 4, and 5 in a matter of 5 minutes, and you got 2,000 years of history in a few chapters, a few verses, even, scattering of verses. And so, in the same way, when it comes to Joel chapter 3, we clearly know that Israel has not been fully restored, but in the process of the restoration, I see that as being future, and that restoration process has started. They are back in the land in unbelief. We know that, Ezekiel 36, 37. Um, and in this process is when the land is seeking to be divided, which we've seen. We've seen that with the United Nations going back, and even the British mandate in the United Nations. So I would see this as being in process right now, when Israel fully, when the fortunes, using that language, when the fortunes of Israel are fully restored, we're in that process right now.
Right. And so modern Israel then still has divine promise of the land. But what about in a legal sense today? Because, there's so much being said about this, mainly coming from the American left, where, they're questioning, does modern Israel actually own the land legally, or are they occupiers, as we're so often told?
Yes, we are. If you look at the history of, we've done a lot of this on our channel, talking about the process, really going from Theodore Herzl in 1897 all the way through the times of immigration to the land, by Jewish people from around the world, through World War I, World War II, the League of Nations, the British Mandate, all the way up to November of 1947 with the United Nations. Um, what Israel, what happened were Jewish people from around the world, just like anywhere else. Again, this is the Ottoman Empire, so even the Ottoman Empire ended in 1917. So, but what you had is, even there, Jewish people were coming, and what were they doing? They were buying property. Again, they were buying buying a dump. Okay, so you
The
have
malaria infested like a lot of it was swampland, as I recall, and they
absolutely, if
they
you go to
they
the Hula
installed
Valley,
irrigation. They did everything, and that land came back to life in an amazing way. I mean, which is prophesied all throughout the Old Testament. We know the ultimate fulfillment is going to be in the millennium, but I mean, we've seen it happen already. You've talked about the exporting of fruit. That it's, I mean, it was not this way before, and it's documented in that book that you mentioned. I mean, it was dismal, and he expresses that in words that are so just expressive. I mean, it's unbelievable. He talks about it over and over and over again. So it's incredible how it's happened already.
it really is. And so when we're talking about a legal sense, what you have is these Jewish people and the Jewish National Fund and the World Jewish Congress, all these, they're raising money. And so what they're doing, and they still do it today, they still do it. They will take this money that raised from around the world and they will empower individual Jewish people to go in and to buy a piece of property from the Arabs. And the Arabs are like, "You're going to give me how much for this dump? Absolutely, I will sell it to you." And so now, um, because so much of that has happened even in modern times, again, that's a legal transaction. And so now, if you look at Hamas or even the Palestinian Authority, uh, they have made it a law that no Arab or so-called Palestinian is allowed to sell their property to Jewish people under the penalty of death. And so the fact that they would come up with a law like that shows that historically, again, it's legal to go buy this. And so if you fast forward to the post, Ottoman Empire, same thing. You have Jewish people immigrating, and you have all of this infrastructure taking place in a British mandate period, basically from 17 on. And so in the midst of all that, a lot of immigration. You've had the League of Nations in 1922. You have all these other the Ramos Agreement. You have all these other agreements that have taken place where these international bodies have tried, or empire builders like Britain have tried to provide legal status. And so going all the way back to the Balfour Declaration, which again led to the British mandate, or in the British mandate, they were legal. It was an internationally recognized situation after World War One. So there's been lots of documentation of, forget the Bible for a moment, that legally, all the way to the official partition in 1947 by the United Nations, granting Israel a nation and making the offer, hey, look, to this problem that had been around for a while, no doubt for decades, and the United Nations saying, okay, we're going to grant Israel international right to here, you guys get this, and the Arabs get this. Well, we know that Israel was so eager to get international recognition, they immediately accepted it. No, it wasn't ideal, but we're going to get something international. So they did. And then, as we know, the Arabs rejected it. And right after that, Israel declared itself a state and got attacked. And so it's also, in the sense of legal, what we do know, and this is the hypocrisy that we see of the United Nations and even the UN Security Council in many ways, is that when you get attacked, and you defend yourself, and then in the sake of that war, I mean, these people are out to destroy you. It's an existential threat. So when you're attacked by many, many nations surrounding you, and as we see in the War of Independence and all the other wars that have taken place, the Six-Day War and other things in Israel's history, when you turn around and gain ground after being attacked, legally, you have the right to keep that land because of self-defense. And so this is why we're coming today to the modern thing, is this: they keep saying that they want to go back to the 1967, the June 4th, 1967 lines. And Israel's like, not going to happen. Legally, we haven't done anything wrong. You guys threatened us and attacked us. And so even though Israel attacked first, I know that's a statement of history, but they were surrounded by enemies, the Egyptian army and other things. So, and of course were attacked, and they said nope. And so they realize now, with the Golan Heights and other things, that we're not ever giving that up. And as we know, in Trump's first administration, he recognized the annexation of the Golan Heights by Israel. And even now, we see some other things that they're doing as it relates to, again, self-defense. So, legally speaking, it is very well argued, without the Bible, that the current parameters of Israel's borders is 100% legal. But again, there's hypocritical stuff happening where people are still trying to force it back to, again, even 1948. And you're like, hey,
Right.
you guys are ignoring the rest of even modern human history. I mean, think about the United States and other countries that have gone west, young man, and taken over Texas and California, and no one's
Well, it's
asking
it's
us
the
to do that.
basis for how any country owns its land. They conquered the previous inhabitants, and that's part of the whole hypocrisy that
Yeah.
even when you listen to the left and they're saying, "Oh, we need to give back the land to the Indians, the Native Americans." Yeah, which ones?
Yep.
They got it from the ones before them. How do you ever trace that back? You can't.